I'm going to show you a speed workout with NFL prospects as they prepare for their pro day prep and teach you how you can implement that into your own training. And we're going to start right now.
So for a dialed in warm up, one of the things that we've got to focus on when we're training with speed is that I like to start initially with dynamic trunk control work, some simple trunk work that's going to focus on our hips, even our upper back, the whole body, but it's really isolating that trunk. Okay, we're going to get into that general warm up in a speed session around our legs, leg swings or targeting our hamstrings or waking up our quads, anything that's going to be relatively simple to increase our heart rate, using our full body essentially, but also just getting in more blood flow to our legs in a very general perspective. Then that third portion of our warm up is going to be the neurological aspect. Okay, so dynamic trunk control, general warm-up, neurological warm-up. And that neurological warm-up is where we're going to add in some twitchier aspects. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit more dynamic work, a little bit more jumpy work, a little bit more just focusing on elasticity. And in this specific workout, we're going to have Taiji Leach, who had a pro day that we were prepping for at Georgia State. And then we've got Earl Vols and Cam Wolf. These are two athletes that have trained with us for quite a while. They've got a pro day at East Stroudsburg. They're Division II athletes. Both of them were all PSAC or all conference. And they both played in the semifinal game of the Division II NCAA playoffs. So just like we mentioned, the first aspect is going to be that trunk control work. I actually like to start trunk control by walking on a PVC pipe. And the reason being is when you're on an unstable surface, this is going to force your trunk to be a little bit more active. Then we're going to get into things like V-up rolls. So V-up rolls are extraordinarily challenging when you first start to do them, but it's a great way to warm up your hips and warm up your trunk. Then you're going to get into some plate passes. I like plate passes because it forces you to focus on being stable while being dynamic trunk control. Okay, so we got to combine those two aspects. And then finally, something easy like a side plank. That's going to be 30 seconds on each side. That's going to get them really focusing on the actions of their trunk. And that's going to then lead into the general portion of their warm up. So with the general needs, after we warm up the trunk, now we're going to get into movements like long lunges, duck walks. These are two exercises that I love to use for lighting up their posterior chain, lighting up their hamstrings or glutes, and then even lighting up their ankles. If you're doing duck walks, your ankles are going to start to feel a bit more mobile. Then we're going to get into some leg swings. Okay, so if we can target leg swings for the adductor, the abductors, get into some hamstring work, you're going to start to feel that, some hip flexion work when we're doing those specific leg swings. Then we're going to do some single leg RDL to hip lock. And I actually like to use this movement even during warm-ups unloaded. Could almost be like a hip airplane to a point. And oftentimes when athletes first start to do this exercise, they really struggle with it at first, but we're sort of connecting. This is the movement that's sort of like the bridge between the DTC work and the neurological work. So now we're getting into that neurological warm up here. These four exercises are movements that I absolutely love. The first one's going to be holding a dowel rod overhead and then entering into a wicket drill. And usually I'll use this first as like a primer for what we're trying to do in the session. So this is going to force them to focus on being stable, having good solid running mechanics, and then entering into that drill as soundly as possible. And they're going to start to wake up a little bit more with those ground reaction forces being extremely vertical. Then we're going to go into the side jump with a pause to an easy sprint. This is something that's going to help tremendously with setting the athlete up with agility. So you're going to get a little bit more twitchy. You're going to really feel that side jump, that eccentric load. You can pause, and then drive out rapidly. Side skips. This is another one that I love. It's easy to execute. Everybody should be skipping all the freaking time, basically to really dial in that nervous system. And then finally, you notice we have the karaoke, the side karaoke with a sled pull. I like to do movements like this where you're holding the weight in your hands, or you have a vest on, or you have it around your belt, like around your waist. And if you have that, doing the side karaoke and you're changing the way that the weight is loaded, meaning it's in your hands, it's on your shoulder, it's around your waist, it's around a vest, it's a really freaking awesome warm-up. It forces the athlete to be stable with their trunk, especially if it's in their hand, but it's just changing from week to week how that load is going to be applied. And that then leads to just a little bit more focused neurological warming up. Okay, so the body's warmed up. We're ready to go. Now we've got to start with that actual speed workout. So one of the best ways that we can begin to really build that top end speed is to use a drill like the wicket drill. So this is a great tool that we can use, one, for patience at top speed, okay, which is really hard to coach. 2, technique. This drill is going to help us as a transition and at top end speed. And if we can do this consistently week over week, the athlete's going to start to feel this transition around 30 to 35 yards where they can really close out that 40-yard sprint. So what we like to do is about a 15 to 20-yard walk in, okay, on the first couple of runs, and we'll have the athlete come in, they'll run through about 15 to 20 yards, they're going to enter into the wickets. Now, these are basically mini hurdles that we put like 6.5 to maybe a little bit closer to 7 feet depending upon the height of the athlete. That'll be 6.5 to 7 feet apart. Okay, so a little bit more than 2 meters. And then as they run through that, they should be able to hold posture. They should be able to focus on that front aspect with the angle of their hip, and in turn drive that hip down and extend well while they're holding that proper posture. Okay, so we could do this for 4 to 6 sets depending upon where we're at in our overall periodization. But this is one of my absolute favorite movements as far as top end speed is concerned and that transition. Now we're going to see Taiji come through here. I would say Ty could have like a little bit higher knee drive here, just a little bit higher, and be a little bit more vertical as he enters into the drill. Still pretty solid edge. Okay, so here we see Cam coming in. Cam's not bad there. He's decent. Hip angle's pretty solid. You can see he starts to flail a little bit. We lose a little bit side to side motion there, but not bad. He jumps into the wall. But I think the big thing here that we really want to look at is this is going to play a major role when we come out of that high speed acceleration or that high level of acceleration. Okay, and we're starting to get to top end velocity, and then that's that transition. So you transition from what type of force production or what type of body angle are you going to hold during acceleration, and then how you start to come up and you start to have more vertical force down into the ground. And that's where that transition comes into play. And that's where the wicket drills do an absolutely phenomenal job for teaching these guys to be more patient. One of the downfalls of football players is that they want to run as hard as possible all the time, and they tend to get a little bit tense. Whereas when you enter in a drill like this, you've got to be much more fluid, and that in turn leads to greater success of the execution of the movement pattern. So when we're talking about open skilled sports, and think about open skilled sports as sports where you're out in a field, on a court, wherever, in a competitive realm, and you can't predict what's happening next. If we're running 100 meters, that's essentially a closed skilled sport. If we're snatching a barbell, we know that every time that we go out to take a snatch attempt, that's a closed skilled sport. But now when we're training for something like football, we're going to have some open skilled aspects. So what NFL scouts are trying to do is they're saying, okay, let's look at something that could be a closed skilled movement. And that might be a 5-10-5 shuttle. That might be a 3-cone drill. And let's use those because it shows acceleration, it shows deceleration, it shows cutting in a closed skilled situation, but it can transfer really well to the thousands and thousands of different angles and positions that you might be in when you're in an open skilled sport like football. So that's where we're going to go now. We're going to get into the 5-10-5 and get into the 3-cone drill. So one of the coaching cues that I like to use is looking at the 5-10-5 or looking at the L cone, essentially the same way that we look at throwing a shot put or a discus. It's literally a technical movement. It's just like a wide receiver running a route. First thing that we're going to do if we're in a 5-10-5, I'm going to coach them to take 2 large steps and then basically 1 jump step into a plant and cut. So it's going to be 4 steps for the first 5. Then they're going to plant, they're going to come out. Their inside hand will go down on this video, but they should be keeping that inside hand up when they're actually getting tested. Okay, so when they're getting tested, inside hand stays up. They cut out of that. They're going to accelerate 1, 2, 3, 4. Then they're going to decelerate on step 5, 6, then jump cut 7, 8. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4 as hard as possible. 5, 6, sink your hips. 7, 8, jump cut, get out. Then the last 5 yards is go as hard as possible. So we're going to see here with Cam executing this, and there's Jan Johnson behind me. Jan played at Penn State with Micah Parsons. He was also one of our first guys in the NFL that we worked with, him and actually one of his former teammates, Tommy Hudson, who's now with the Saints. Tommy was at Tennessee when Jan was down there with the Titans. See here, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see Cam's left hand and right there. So here's an interesting thing is like coaching them to not place that hand, boom, And actually Jan comes in, he's like, here's some things that we can do to try and dial in this cut a little bit more effectively so that when they plant, they learn how to decelerate a little bit more effectively. They change that center of mass. Here's Tai Chi. There we go. A little long on that. When we're looking at this, it's interesting because Ty ran a pretty freaking good, like I want to say he ran a 4.21 when he was at his pro day. If you saw the speed that he just went, that was probably 65-70% speed. When guys are going a little slower, their strides actually tend to lengthen a little bit. They're not as precise at times. But if we can work through and get a ton of drill work at like 60 to 75%, then when we dial it in, they're much more comfortable. And that's essentially what ended up happening with Ty when we went to his pro day and he executed that shuttle. Okay, so that takes us into the next closed skill test that NFL scouts will use in determining who's going to best fit into the open skilled sport. Okay, and that's where we get into the 3-cone. Now, we see Earl here. Earl's a D tackle. He's not super crisp at this point. This is pretty early on. This is probably around like day 35. And he ends up, he's got his pro day actually in the next couple days, which is going to end up being around 73 days of training for in his case. So we're going to be looking at, on this 3-cone, we're going to have big drive in 4 steps, okay? But huge steps on the first 2. He's going to cut without that inside down. He's going to come back. He's going to hit 3 steps again. Okay, so it's going to be 1, 2, 3. Get out of that cut again. Then as he cuts and he goes through the 3-cone drill, ideally, when he gets to the actual second cone, which is in theory now it's 1, 2, 3, 4th cone that you're going to be going around, the 4th time that you go around, what we're going to see is that step 7, step 8, step 9, ideally we would have that step 8 tight and a little bit past the cone. That doesn't necessarily happen all the time, but that's like the ideal situation. But I want you to watch here with Earl, because when you first start to learn this drill, and these are drills, 5-10-5 and the L cone, I actually think are really fantastic drills that you can do on a regular basis just to try and improve your agility and just to try and start to think about the technical movement pattern. And they're pretty fun to do to see as measurements. Now, he's a little high with his butt there. Okay, I actually want to come back here, and you can see with Earl, he does a little bit right there, does a little jump step with that left. I'm going to come back. I want to see with Earl and what he's working on now. Right there, that left foot sort of just does a little boom right here. This left foot ends up hopping just a hair. Okay, so it's going to hop. I don't want that to happen. I want him to take bigger strides, keep that down, and get out quickly. Some really advanced guys, Jackson Smith and Jigba, he's capable of doing that. And I think there's some twitchier, longer guys that can get away with something like this. It's like a false step for them. I think when Earl and what we've seen with his times, when he doesn't do this little false step, he actually gets out of the cut way smoother. Now here you can just see there, he's a little tight. And I also want to point out the last cone there, that cone 4, 3, right here. Okay. I want Earl's left foot at this point. His left foot should be closer to that white line, okay? And also a little bit further away from the cone, because that cut right there really should be setting him up for bringing it home. He actually adds in a step on this specific run, which does tend to slow everything down. Okay, and that's where it's like, okay, we understand how the precise movement pattern is, how the precise steps are, and so we can see that model and work through over a 60-day time frame with the pro day guys. Like, okay, we've got to dial this in, we got to iron that out, and that's where you can start to make these improvements. Even though these are tests, you can use them to really dial things in and to really figure out yourself how to make technical adjustments at high speed. So one of the big questions is, how are movements like this actually going to help a normal person, a general athlete, someone that is just looking to benefit from speed-based training? So one of the best ways that you can transfer this is, one, set up a speed-based system where you're, let's say on day 1, you're doing something more like linear sprints, and day 3 or day 4, you're doing more agility work. The most linear work that we did on this specific session was around the wicket drills. How can we drill and learn better mechanics at top end? But most of this specific session was around improving their ability to accelerate and decelerate in these specific tests, because these guys were prepping for their pro day tests. Ty ended up going I want to say it was, again, like a 4.21 in the shuttle. When we went to his pro day in the 3 cone, if I can remember correctly, it was like a 7.18 or 7.2, somewhere along those lines. He had a 34.5-inch vert. He had a 10.3 broad, which he increased by over a foot, 19 reps on the bench press. He ended up doing very, very well. And that's the thing with this specific session. If you can use the 5-10-5 as something to gauge how you're making progress, if you can use the 3 cone as something to gauge how you're learning that footwork and how well you can turn it over and apply force into the ground, and then at the same time, you can do, let's say, 30s, 40s, 50s, something along those distances once a week, that's going to really help with building that entire speed spectrum.
The final beauty of these exercises is that they can be done at a park or out in the field or even in a backyard if you have one. And with our recent updates inside of Peak Strength, athletes like yourself are going to have direct access to speed-specific programming directly related to your sport. Peak Strength will periodize your speed training and synergize that training specifically with explosive work and with strength training work. And as an athlete, everything that you will need to be successful in the realm of sports performance will be available in one specific place, and that's Peak Strength. So head over to peakstrength.app, the Google Play Store or the Apple iOS Store, and you can download Peak Strength today and start that journey to become a freak. Because remember, freaks, if you want to become a champion, you've always got to cultivate your power. Peace.